The Buffalo Bills sent wide receiver Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. We're exploring the deal from both sides today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who make Locked On NFL Scouting your first listen every day, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase.
Joe, I trust you had as enjoyable of a field trip as you've ever had in your life yesterday.
Yeah, you know what's funny is I did everything I needed to do to leave my house at 8:30 a.m. yesterday and not have any more work to do the rest of the day. Like we recorded Locked On NFL Scouting on Tuesday night, which is not normal for us, right? We're doing that at like 9 o'clock after bedtime. I wake up early, get Locked On Bills done, had a great conversation about James Cook, thought I was done. And then I'm on a field trip, a safari with preschoolers on a wagon being pulled around by 3 Clydesdales, surrounded by zebras and antelopes and potbelly pigs and ostriches and giraffes, Highland cows. My phone starts blowing up. It happened. Bill sent Stefon Diggs to the Houston Texans. It's Diggs, a 2024 6, a 2025 5, to Houston for a 2025 second round pick that comes through the Minnesota Vikings. And so obviously there's a lot to unpack, and this is the right format for it because our entire objective of this podcast is to get into the whys behind decisions that teams make. And I'm excited to kind of unpack this with you. And you and I really haven't talked about it individually, so I'm very anxious to kind of get some of your thoughts on this deal from both sides of the equation.
Yeah, and I know every time Stefon Diggs has posted something on social media, I'll text it to you and be like, it's Steph being Steph again. And that's kind of been like the expectation. And it feels like this saga of the last 2 years of, is he unhappy? There's the rumors, there's the end of season on the sideline experience that you get a chance to see. And the general expectation was kind of like, oh, well, you know, it's Steph being Steph. Like it's just a part of the experience of having him. And then this bombshell obviously drops yesterday. And I was curious from your perspective, you're taking a $31 million dead cap hit. You're getting a 2025 2 as the primary return. You get a sense that some of the behind the scenes stuff did kind of serve as a catalyst here for this decision, because I think if you look at Stefon Diggs, even in a vacuum, at $19 million salary relative to what some of these other receivers are getting, it's appropriate value for a guy who I know is slowing down and is 30 years old. So you have to be considerate of that as well. But just curious, I guess, do you feel like the value was impacted by whatever was going on behind the scenes in Buffalo?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts there. First of all, the compensation. Keenan Allen went for a 4. Amari Cooper went for a 5. I think getting a 2, albeit next year, is probably fine in terms of like the actual trade value. I don't really take much exception with that on either side of the equation. I think what's very clear is that the Bills were done with Stefon Diggs. Like they were over it. And I don't think that was part of their original blueprint this offseason, right? If their plan was to trade Stefon Diggs, they'd have done it sooner than yesterday. And so that's kind of a clear pivot, no matter how you spin it. You can't deny that. I don't think it was their intent to trade Stefon Diggs. I think it just became a situation where he probably finessed his way out and wanted out. And I think that's probably confusing. For as much as there was drama, it's hard to know what it's rooted in, right? Like we know that there's drama. We know that. But like, why are receivers typically unhappy? Well, they're not getting the ball. That's not true. Stefon Diggs is the most targeted receiver in the NFL over the last 4 years with insane production. Averaged 111 catches, over 1,300 yards, and over 9 touchdowns in his 4 seasons in Buffalo. He's winning. He's on a team that has a chance to win every single year. So, like, he's got a good quarterback. You know, like what is it that that's this big holdup. 2 years ago, Diggs and Allen are on the front page of Sports Illustrated Kids as best friends. It's like, what is this? But there's something there. And now he's on the Houston Texans. And so, yeah, I think this really starts in that Bengals divisional loss playoff game where, Diggs is yelling at Josh Allen with his palms in the air, and Josh Allen's ignoring him on the sideline, and they're getting their butts kicked by the Cincinnati Bengals. And that entire offseason's weird. He's not around the facility. Finally shows up to mandatory OTAs on day one. McDermott sends him home, comes out, does a press conference and says, we're very concerned. 3 hours later, he comes back and he's like kind of backpedaling on that statement. Then he gets to training camp and everyone's saying all the right things. Starts off with a bang, right? 5 100-yard games in the first 6 of the season. You think he's going to have the best season of his career. Then the wheels just fall completely off, and the production just wasn't there. He was the most targeted player on the team over the last 12 weeks of the season. But Khalil Shakir led the team in reception yards. Dalton Kincaid led the team in receptions. Like, they transitioned in so many ways during that season. But then the messaging coming out of the year was, Diggs is our guy. Diggs is our guy. Josh Allen, I love him, right? I'll defend him to the end of the earth. And here we are. He's traded for a future too. So what the fallout is confusing to put your finger on, but there is definitely a fallout, and very clearly the Bills were done with Diggs.
Right. So much so, I think the thing that made it apparent that this was just like, this is going to be better for everybody to move on, was the salary cap implications. And I know there were a lot of people that thought, there's no way this player gets dealt in year one of a 4-year contract extension, because you'd lose salary cap space to move on from Stefon Diggs. I think they lost $3.2 million in cap space is what the grand total ended up being, because this trade is being processed ahead of the 2024 NFL draft, because there's a 2024 draft pick that's in it. So it's not like you could agree in principle to trade Stefon Diggs and then wait until post June 1st for a salary cap relief to actually process and do the deal. And that'd be kind of weird too. Like, we're going to agree in principle, but we're going to go into the draft so Houston could have a receiver fall into their lap and pick him and then say, never mind, we're not going to do the trade anymore because we drafted a wide receiver that we didn't think was going to be there for it. Like, that's not a way that this business could have possibly been done. Never mind the fact that there was a 2024 draft pick that's involved in the swap.
I think if there's a sin that the Bills committed in their dealings with Stefon Diggs, it was extending him 2 years before his contract went up. And I know that there was a lot of talk where like, yeah, Diggs is one of the best receivers in the league, but he's not paid like it. And you kind of just, as Stefon Diggs and like the rifts that will just come with him, right? That has been throughout his career. Thought to yourself, man, when it's a ticking bomb, And 2 years early, they extended him. So he's starting, this is year one of a 4-year, $96 million deal that they agreed to 2 years ago. I think that's, if I want to say, okay, where's the bad business on the Bill side of things? It's there. And I think that's a rule that Beane broke. And I think right now it's biting him in the butt. And
I'm glad you said that. It's not overly pertinent to this conversation, but that was the sin that the Dolphins committed with Xavier Howard's contract, was he had several, and they did it more than once, several years left on the contract, and we'll give you the new extension to kind of reduce the money and appease the player. So that if there's a lesson to be learned from a contract and roster management of high-level talent, particularly as they do get into the middle stages of their career, maybe don't do extensions with several years left on the current contract. Is probably a good general rule of thumb. Otherwise, you're going to be taking a $14 million dead cap hit in 2025 and a $7 million dead cap hit this year if you had to cut a player like Xavier Howard, or if you got to trade Stefon Diggs, you're going to take a $31 million dead cap hit in that regard.
Big lesson learned, folks. Don't extend players 2 years before their contract expires. Now, there's obviously a lot coming for the Bills side of things. We're going to get to that later on. We'll talk about the fallout on both sides. But the Houston Texans have added a pretty friggin' good wide receiver to a pretty friggin' good roster. We're going to talk about that here in just a moment. So be sure to stick with us. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer.
So you obviously mentioned Houston acquiring Stefon Diggs and their evolution as a franchise from downtrodden for several seasons and a couple of one-and-done head coaches to a bit of a playoff run this past year. Now adding Stefon Diggs to the mix, very active in free agency, adding a number of heavyweight players. This is a really exciting time to be a Houston Texans fan. But in the same way that we started this show talking about telling the story of Stefon Diggs in Buffalo, because that's how this event happened, I think it is notable to acknowledge from Houston's side of things how they got here, right? This is a team that had the fallout with Bill O'Brien, had the fallout with Deshaun Watson. They get a king's ransom of picks for Deshaun Watson, but in that process, they hired 2 coaches that they gave a 1-year leash to without really doing anything to give them and afford them a chance to compete in free agency. The David Culley year marred with Deshaun Watson being around the team and not really being suspended. And then the Lovie Smith year, Lovie Smith being the hire, that free agency period, they signed a bunch of guys to just 1-year deals to kind of be bridge years. So I think the story of Houston, I think, is an important one to kind of look at, because I've already saw it on the timeline, like, oh, people are going to try to replicate the Texans formula. Well, how many elements of this formula aren't really replicatable for how they have come into this position? It's almost like what the Browns did when they were 1-31 in a 2-year stretch with Hugh, and they got all the cap space and they got all the draft picks, and they end up reaping the benefits of that. But it's not just as simple as like, oh, we hired John Dorsey and we drafted Baker Mayfield and it swung everything around. It's the domino effects that led you to that point. And I think some of the things that Houston did along the way shouldn't be overlooked as contributing factors to how they went from picking number 2 in the draft and having CJ Stroud to 1 year later magically being this absolutely loaded roster.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% that there's not a blueprint that's replicatable here. I think philosophically what's replicatable is that they took their medicine, right? Like, and I think sometimes teams just don't do that. Yes, I'm talking about the New Orleans Saints. Like, at some point you have to take your medicine, tear it down, stockpile assets, and build it back up. And now a big, huge part of that is certainly hitting on those investments and then complementing that with the right veterans. Certainly feels like Houston's on that right track. And I love that you started this conversation with that piece of it, because it's not, I mean, who has an elite NFL quarterback that has the circumstances that Deshaun Watson goes through, that still gets the trade compensation that exists, that goes through a really unserious operation for 2 years where, you know, you're looking at this, and I remember saying this is an expansion team. And then we said it again for another season.
Right, because then they went into that whole free agency window after that first season in 2021, and in 2022, they just signed a bunch of dudes to 1 year, $3 million contracts, and like they didn't really pursue cornerstone type players. So it's like they're treading water is probably the way to put how they chose to handle that time until they got aligned with what they wanted to be.
I want to talk about Stefon Diggs' fit in this offense. And I want to talk about this Texans roster overall, because I think it's coming together really, really well. But I want to ask you this question first. As you consider the final 4 teams in the AFC last year, I want to ask you a question, simply yes or no. Are they a better roster right now than they were at the end of last season?
Okay.
We'll start with the Baltimore Ravens. Are the Baltimore Ravens a better okay. Are the Kansas City Chiefs a better roster right now than they were at the end of last season? Minus L'Jarius Sneed, obviously, the big name that's not there.
They added some wide receiver help. Can I say a push there?
So would you say it's Hollywood Brown for MVS minus L'Jarius Sneed? Like, you think this is a better team?
Okay, so if you're to just boil it down to net gains and losses, they have not replaced L'Jarius Sneed at this stage.
Right. I'm just talking literally at this moment in time.
Okay. I'll play ball. Okay. Their losses outgain their gains.
Buffalo, are they a better team right now than they were at the end of last season?
No.
Houston Texans, are they a better team right now than they
Yes.
were? So that's exciting, right? Like, you are one of the final four teams, and you're the only one that I think you can, like, honestly, objectively say this roster is in a better position today than it was when they lost to Baltimore, right? They lost to Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think they can get better at, I think their cornerback too, right? Opposite of Derek Stingley with Jeff Okudah, kind of CJ Henderson penciled in. That feels upgradable to me. I think maybe they have room for like a defensive tackle, like a big name there, potential, or like in more impacted defensive tackle. This roster's friggin' good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's young, and they've supplemented that with some meaningful veteran talent. Houston's going places. It feels good. Now, I will say this. I think the Jaguars are a cautionary tale here. We're coming out of 2022. They were the shiny new thing, right? Everybody thought the Jaguars were going to be this force in the AFC. Well, expectations bring about, a new, you're playing football from a different vantage point. So we have to see how they meet those expectations. But the point is they've earned them. And I think Houston's the shiny new thing, and how they deliver is yet to be seen. But I think there's plenty of reasons to be optimistic.
For sure. Yeah, I think I'm glad you mentioned Jacksonville, because we looked at Jacksonville last year with their roster and the fact that they won a playoff game and made a bit of a playoff run. You're like, oh, they're guaranteed 12-win team. AFC South is soft. You don't know. Is Richardson going to make a massive leap with his first year if he stays healthy all year? Is Tennessee and their spending going to raise the floor for them? And is light bulb going to come on for Will Levis? Like, I think the expectations for Houston should be extremely high. And that's evidenced by what they did this offseason and what they did last season at the end of the year. And you're hoping CJ Stroud doesn't endure kind of that second-year regression. And they have done everything possible between Joe Mixon and now Stefon Diggs and not compensating 2024 draft capital to put him in the best position to do that.
Yeah, getting better on defense as well. Offensive line is really, really strong. It's a good looking operation here. Now, specifically Stefon Diggs to this offense. Bobby Slowik off the Shanahan tree, CJ Stroud year 2, good offensive line. Of course, Nico Collins really broke out last year. Looks like he's, like a high volume piece of this offense. They brought back Dalton Schultz at tight end. Tank Dell coming back off injury, but certainly had really strong start to his campaign. Oh, by the way, they have Noah Brown, John Mechie, Robert Woods. Like, this team's pretty loaded when it comes to weapons. When you think about Stefon Diggs' arrival here with Nico Collins, is this, both of those are north of 100 target players for them? Is that kind of how you see this? I think they're really nice complementary skill sets. I wish that Gabe Davis was Nico Collins, right? Like, I feel like that would have been a great pair in Buffalo. I think this might be, at least from his time in Buffalo, I don't want to diminish Adam Thielen, might be the best second guy that he's had in the mix in a while. If you talk about where coverage can be dictated, I think it's going to be tough for teams.
So, and then you also have Dalton Schultz is a 90 target player last year in this offense. And maybe that goes down a bit, but I find a great deal of silver lining knowing that Robert Woods had 75 targets last year. Give all those to Stefon Diggs.
Yeah.
Right? Lop 10 off Dalton Schultz, lop 10 off Tank Dell, give Robert Woods his entire workload, and then take some of the 55 targets that Noah Brown got and give them to Stefon Diggs as well. And you can have 100 targets for Steph Diggs. You can have 100 targets for Nico Collins. Dalton Schultz can still have 80 targets. Because that's a little bit of the worry, right? Is you pay Dalton Schultz a lot of money. You want to make sure that you have enough of the football to go around relative to the incurred cost. This is the luxury of doing business on a quarterback rookie contract when you know who the quarterback is after the first season.
Yeah.
Right? Some of these quarterbacks, like you think about Bryce Young. You think about I guess Tua Tagovailoa is an applicable name there, where there's uncertainty after the first year on like how well is he ultimately going to perform, and it takes away some of the ability to be as aggressive as a team like Houston can be, or like when you get the early stage flashes of Joe Burrow in 2020 before he got injured. Like there's a different level of investment and convictions. Like, yeah, we got what we need around them, so like chips in, let's go. We're going to get 3 years.
What I really like about CJ Stroud's marriage now with Stefon Diggs is I think that CJ Stroud's a really accurate quarterback, and the ball placement is going to be a big time asset for Stefon Diggs. I think there's a level of concern, but it's eased by the rest of the supporting cast. Is I think Diggs' ability to win down the field has diminished a lot, and I think that's okay because of what CJ Stroud has in Collins, in Tank Dell, even Noah Brown as those vertical players. So if you get that roof pushed from then, I think you're less concerned about the deep ball connection between Diggs and Stroud. And I think that you let Diggs be that technician underneath that can get you buckets, and you kind of look elsewhere for the big plays that you want in your offense.
Yeah, those three players all had over 15 yards per reception last season for Houston, including Noah Brown over 17 yards per reception. So Billy get down the field. There's plenty of those shot plays and big body types that can also run, and then obviously Tank Dell can fly. A lot of versatility that kind of makes Steph Diggs kind of your intermediate and chain mover type, who then you can get into run after catch situations if you want to, and you can really take advantage of teams no matter how they choose to try to defend.
See how it all comes together, but it looks like a good path for the Houston Texans. All right, we're going to get into the draft fallout. Obviously, the Bills' big need at receiver, the Texans' interesting draft opportunities. We're going to get into that on the other side of it, so be sure to stick with us. Folks, you shouldn't have to worry when you're looking to buy tickets for your next big event. Well, you don't have to, because Game Time is here for you, and it's the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They have killer deals on last-minute tickets, all-in prices of view from your seat, and a best price guarantee. Simply put, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The app is awesome, easy to navigate. They give you flash deals, which I love, and I also love that they send the ticket straight to your phone. So when you buy a ticket from Game Time, you don't have to dig through emails to find it. It goes straight to your phone. So snag the tickets without the stress and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers.
So Houston has parlayed their pick at 23 into a trade down with Minnesota, and then parlayed the future 2 out of that trade down into Stefon Diggs. So the first fallout for Buffalo is you're rooting for the quarterback that the Vikings ultimately are going to end up drafting to have a bit of a rough season.
Yeah, go not Vikings, right? Get that to be a top 40 pick is what you hope for.
Go whoever the Vikings are playing, right?
Yeah. Maybe not you, but for me, right?
Yes, for you.
Go Vikings, right, Kyle?
Go Vikings. Skull. Minnesota, that trade I thought was an interesting one at the time. We talked about the timing of it. We talked about the value where you go from 23 to 42 for only really a future 2. I think this kind of helps the trade grade age more gracefully for Houston in my mind, because having that asset allows this to get done, and you're creating a really exciting supporting cast for your young player. You still have a pick at 42, and then you have your own pick at 59, and then you have Philly's pick at 86. So you'd still have 3 top 100 picks in a deep class. and you have 2 4s. So, like, if you want to move up or down the board a little bit, you have the flexibility to do it for Houston. So that's when I think about Houston's implications here. I think that's what stands out to me.
Good day to be a Houston Texans fan. I mean, 42, 59, 86, 123, 127. That's exciting. I mean, and I mentioned already, like, you need corner, you need a defensive tackle. Boy, oh boy, are you in the sweet spot for both of those things. You can probably find some meaningful offensive line depth along the way too, if that's something that you wanted to figure out. I mean, I think what they have aligns so well with this draft class that Nick Caserio just has a wonderful opportunity in front of him to add meaningful talent and be unconcerned that he doesn't have a first-round pick this year. And you know, like, whatever they don't have next year, they don't have the 2. I don't think they care about that either.
No. Yeah. And, you know, if they're going to continue finessing the board, who's to say they don't come into an opportunity to move and allocate more draft capital, which seems to be a part of what they're interested in doing, because draft picks, while they're valuable for adding rookie contracts, they've got the big thing under control, which is the quarterback contract for the next several seasons. Like, they probably have 5 years before they have a really big quarterback hit on their cap.
Yeah.
You could trade those picks for other players, which we just saw them do. So continuing to move and shake and allocate those mid-round assets or day 2 assets for a team like this, they might have more value in what they would bring for established NFL players. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them continue to move up and down the board or finesse the board as they see fit. But you mentioned corner, defensive tackle. I'm sitting here looking at Tankathon for their assessment of current draft picks, and their mock draft on Tankathon has them drafting Peyton Wilson at 42. Wouldn't that be?
That's interesting. I know they like Christian Harris, and they just signed Azeez Al-Shahir.
Imagine replacing To'o with Peyton Wilson, though.
Yeah. If you're going to play, you're going to do 3 linebacker stuff. I mean, for sure.
With those backers, you could do some 3 linebacker stuff.
Yeah, with Harris's range. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And they Max Melton and Brandon Dorless.
Perfect. Yeah, just do that. Right? Yeah. Well, yep, very good. You'll be real set. The Bills side of things here,
wide receiver bust, baby.
Yeah, well, probably for sure now, right? Like, I wasn't there when the Bills had Stefon Diggs. Because of the depth of the class, I thought you didn't have to kind of box yourself in a receiver. Maybe you do now. You certainly have room for a target, like a volume guy, right? Like a high target piece. I mean, between Diggs and Gabe Davis no longer being in this offense, that vacates well over 200 targets. And obviously you have a Dalton Kincaid, who's certainly going to be a north of 100 target guy for you.
150 target guy, dude.
Maybe so.
Let's be honest.
I'm here for all of that. Khalil Shakir, who's led the team in receiving over the last 12 weeks and really was clutching some big moments, who I think is certainly worthy of a lot of targets. Curtis Samuel, who you paid, but you got room, right? I still think you got plenty of room here to add. And whether that's sticking and picking at 28, there should be some options. But I think the compelling part from the Bills side of things now is, what does Brandon Beane do? Is this a situation now where he's loaded with that extra 2nd-round pick next year, and he's willing to part with his 1st rounder to go make a big move up the board? Maybe for one of those big 3, but do they love Brian Thomas? Like, is it not necessarily moving into 6, 7, or 8, or maybe maybe it's not that, it's 13 or 12 or something like that. A team like maybe the Raiders or Broncos that want to move back, and maybe they feel comfortable picking something else there, and the Bills could get in range. Something is coming, right? The Bills didn't trade away Stefon Diggs to not have some type of replacement plan in place. So whether it's a move up the board, whether they do look at a veteran that they could trade for, when you listen to Brandon Beane talk about the deal yesterday afternoon, pretty clear that he's got something up his sleeve. It's just a matter of what is that.
So can I ask you this too, as far as Buffalo, where obviously they've transitioned away from some older players, and there's been some upheaval versus kind of like the status quo players.
Yeah.
And then you look at this year's draft capital that Buffalo has at their disposal, 2 picks in the first 125.
Yeah.
They're in the midst of kind of this salary cap transition as well. Do you think it's more likely that Buffalo would be aggressive to go strike for a singular player to replace, or do you think it's more likely that in the midst of their transition, they would covet the volume and knowing you have the extra second round pick and, trying to replace, like, how deep is the pipeline in Buffalo? I guess is my question. What's the perceived depth of the pipeline?
I think with every point in a team's life cycle, I think philosophically what you do should probably be dictated by that. If you look at what's been the norm with Brandon Beane, he's traded up for every single first-round pick that he's made except for Ed Oliver, who he picked at number 9. He's traded up for every other one of them. And not necessarily huge trades, but a few spots to go get a player that he really likes. I mean, now, of course, Josh Allen was the huge trade up. And so when I think about it like that, like what has his history told us? He's much more of a trade up general manager. Does this reset, right? I think the Bills have reset their roster in some ways. Does that lend itself to a new line of thinking? I wonder if he probably wanted to do that. He said last year that he was trading back in the first round, but then Dalton Kincaid was there, so he moved up. I don't know, man. Like, who knows? But I think with the type of need that exists at receiver right now, I wonder if that now takes him out of the mindset of, well, yeah, I want to get a bunch of young players to fill out our roster to, no, I got to get this number one receiver. Josh Allen's in his prime. We got to go do it. Right. I could talk myself into both outcomes.
Yeah. Because that was my biggest question coming out of this for Buffalo was like, it makes a lot of sense to go get a 1, but if we're going to be a more 12 personnel heavy team and you have Khalil Shakir, and I know you signed Curtis Samuel, and I know both those guys are ideally slot type players. So like there's a lot of this overlap with like middle of the field type of targets. Is it just kind of like you just got done saying with Houston, like sometimes teams take your lumps, and sometimes when you're a team with an elite quarterback, take your lumps means we're going to go 10-7 and be a wild card team for a year, but feel like we're really recalibrated. Like a lot of these sustained winners across the league, whether it's Baltimore or Pittsburgh, maybe not now Pittsburgh, but like, you know what I mean? Like 2010s Pittsburgh, there is that kind of ebb and flow of we're going to contend, but how much are we going to contend? So the trade for a wide receiver says we're going to contend, but I think the more broad volume of picks perspective says we are long-term going to contend. We know we're going to win some games this year, but we're more focused on aligning for the next peak of where all the talent is available to us.
Could be either thing. There's so much transition with the Bills roster wise, coaching staff wise. I think the team's going to have a bit of a different look and feel. Mm-hmm. Obviously it's been a journey of being a really good team, but stalling out in the divisional round or once in the AFC Championship game. And I think that they're willing to put a new set of tires on the car and see if they can get you a little bit further. And that last nucleus was good enough for you to stall out in the playoffs, and so I think the reset can be exciting. It's, obviously it's uncharted territory. We're reacting in a vacuum. It's an incomplete data set right now based on the way this roster looks. But I think we're going to get some clues on that based on what the domino is. If it is stick and pick, if it's trade up for a receiver, is Brandon Ayuk an option? Is T. Higgins an option? I think there's so many different ways that this can go. I just know that there's something, right? Something's going to happen here.
Well, we'll stay tuned. And you can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast to react to that and all of the other NFL news as it transpires. Hope you guys enjoyed this discussion on the Stefon Diggs trade. I'm Kyle Crabbs. He's Joe Marino. We're locked on NFL Scouting. We'll talk to you all again tomorrow.